I'm Scott Fitzke, location manager at Lexington.
Nate Carl, CTS here in Hastings.
Again, we're going to teach you the SeedStar 2 class. So if anybody has any, if you've got like we've got a few other classes, SeedStar XP, that would control, or you'll be able to see your simulation and downforce. So if you have that, we've got another class, just making sure you're in the right class. You don't have that. So starting off, I'd like to show you how to get basic layout or a home page set up for in your 2630 monitor. You will go into the main menu, bottom right hand corner, and you will go into Layout Manager. And then you have the option of 5 pages that you can set up. So you select which page you want, then you will select Include in Home Page Selection, so it will come up when you hit the Home button. And then you've got an option of what layout you want. And you select the big area, then go into the planner function, and you'll select that page, and then you can go back into the GS3 function and select the mapping page. So now if he hits the home page down there, what he just set up is how you can change those run pages. So there's 2 pages turned on only right now. So going through the simulator here, we will just go into the main menu and go into the planner setup page, and it's got all the setup buttons along the right hand side. So starting at the top right, anytime you hit F there, you will get this page to the left. If you hit the G button, you'll get a different function. So when you hit F, you've got that main planner run page, if you get confused. And at the top, you've got a target population. So right now, if he hits it, it toggles between 32,000 and 36,000. And you're able to change that on the fly between your irrigated pivots to your dryland corners. And the way this is currently set up right now is you've got all three motors, and there's a different box that we'll show you later that you can change to get them all on the same rate. So going through the next box down, the toggle button on the right, that gives you a function called Planner at a Glance, and that bar graph in the middle, that is currently set to a 36,000 rate. And if you change if you change the population back to the 32, that changes your center bar graph to 32. Again, the toggle button up on the top right, gives you the scan function, and your min and your max. So if you got multiples or skips, that'd kind of point that out right there. Or you can watch a individual row if you have an individual row that keeps messing up for you. From there, the next box there is a QS reset. It's quick start reset. So if you're stopped in the middle of the field and you want to start going again without picking up your planter, you can hit that button and it will start counting down from 6 seconds, and you've got 6 seconds to start moving. So in other words, it will kick the drive in a lot quicker, and you don't have to pick up the planter and back up if you don't want to. No, you want to get moving before the 6 seconds is up. If you don't, hit the button again. If you hit the button when you before you start moving, you will avoid the skip. That's the idea of it. If you take off with it, if you didn't hit it, and you take off with it, then you will have probably a skip, roughly about that size. Otherwise, I mean, if you're really not sure about it, the best thing to do is go ahead and lift up and back up and restart. So, and each time that you set the planter down in the ground, when you're moving, you set it down, when it's enabled, it restarts each time too. So it's always on a quick start reset. So it's always restarting like that. The next box down is your rotate seed meters button. So your planter's got to be up and you need to be stopped to do this. So most of the time what people like to use this for is when they're starting out and they've just started their vacuum. So you want to fill the plate up, so go ahead and you'll hit that 2 if not 3 times and make sure you got seed coming out of all your rows. So next boxes down are the green boxes. That is the row command boxes if you've got that option on your planter. The green means that they're good, they're ready to plant. Black means that you've got them controlled off like he is doing with those buttons. And white or gray means that you're in an area that you've already planted and there is coverage there. So, let's see here. The next box down, that is your seeds an acre, your average. When he hits the box and splits it into 3, that's your seeds an acre for each of your motors, how it's split off. The next box down from there is your vacuum. So example, this one currently has 3 vacuums, the way it's set, and that'll give you the readout of your vacs. So if you're standing still, the vacuum's not running, and one of those are reading something, you either need to go in and zero them, or you might have a faulty sensor. So the next section right there is the radar, or your wheel speed. So that little radar symbol behind the tractor, that will go in and out when you're standing still. If you've got it selected on auto, that when you're standing still, that radar symbol won't be there. And when you start moving, the radar symbol will come up. If you are not, if that symbol does not come up, that means that you're not going off of radar, you're going off of tractor wheel speed. And tractor wheel speed will work, it's just not as accurate, because if you start to slip, if that tractor starts to slip going up a hill, you will overpopulate. So, the next box is the acres. You can multiple of things. You can change it to count down to 0. You can put 150 acres in it. The 1 is your acre counter 1, so you can keep track of like your field. Acre counter 2, keep track of your yearly total, what you planted for the year. And then you've got acres per hour also. The next box is over, or discontinuance. You can just change what you want to see there. Does anybody have any questions on that part of the monitor? Nope? Okay. We'll go ahead and dive into some of the settings.
All right, so we'll continue to work our way down our options here on the right-hand side. Anytime that we see this up arrow and then an icon next to it, the up arrow indicates a setup is what Deere's looking for. So if we hit that box there, G, we'll get into another section to our configuration. Now this is generally set up the first time we configure a planter, because we're basically telling the controllers on there exactly what to expect. What do we have in place? So we're telling it in this scenario that we have 24 rows on a 30-inch spacing. 720 inches of total width. We really, most of the time, we really are not using anything for split row or transport. Clutch disconnect warning is just going to give you that warning anytime clutches kick out. Next tab at the top is our sensor tab. And we're going to have a number of drop downs in this area. So this is going to be any sensor that we have on the planter. So the first one we have here is our seed tubes. It shows me here that all of our rows are on. This would be, in some scenarios, maybe you want to turn off a row. It's not really anything too common that we would do most of the time now. Maybe in the seed corn, if we don't want to look, if we've got some rows locked up in the air and we're not wanting to see anything off of those rows, we might turn those off. Down here in the bottom, we do have our headland warning suppression. So this is just going to stop those warnings every time we come in and out of the headlands, so our row alarms aren't beeping at us the whole time. From our drop down under seed, we'll go down. The next one we have is vacuum. So this is where we're going to tell the controller how many sensors that we have on this planter for vacuum. Of each one, each sensor has its own calculation value. This is the default number that Deere uses for all of our sensors. The only time that would be different is if you use a third-party source for a sensor, like a Dickie John or a Raven. They've got some vacuum sensors. Down here in the bottom, we see the indication of all three sensors, kind of like we had on that main run screen. So down here, to the right of it, we also have an arrow that points to the right with a 0. This is our reset button. So anytime that we see sitting stagnantly, if we're seeing a number that's bounced from 0 to 0.1 or 0.2, but we don't have the vacuum on, we're probably having an issue with that sensor. So the first thing we can try is to re-zero it, bring it back down to nothing, and see if that continues to kind of throw up some false numbers. If it does, it's probably a good time to look at putting a new sensor in it or doing some further diagnostics. Go back up to our drop-down box. Fertilizer. For the planters that did come equipped with factory fertilizer, this process is very much so the same as it was in the vacuum. So we need to tell it if we want a high pressure warning, how many sensors we have in total, and then the calculation value for each one. This will change because usually this is Deere's, again, their default number, but we do have some different options from some third-party sources if those sensors have been put on at any time. Down here in the bottom again, we would reset that pressure sensor stagnant. Typically on a pressure sensor like that for fertilizer, we try to take them out all the way. So there's absolutely nothing in that system pushing against that sensor, and then zero that back out. Next drop down. Height sensor. So we've got a couple different ways to set up a height sensor, and this is usually determined on what type of planter that we have. Over here on the left, if we share a common, this would typically be a mounted planter. If we hit our up, it's going to tell us to go ahead and fully raise the planter up, hit enter, and that's going to store that fully up value. Same thing for down, it's going to tell us to fully lower the planter, hit our enter button, and that's going to save that new low value. Now if we come over here to separate, we'll see if the simulator will play nice now, and then we hit this box. It's going to give us two different values. So we're going to see the current height the planter is at, and then also where we want our motors to start and stop at. So if you have a specific value you want it to be at before it takes off, you could come in here and adjust that to whatever you see. In the same way that we would set up, header height logging on like a combine. Cancel out of that. Last option under our sensor tab is our tractor speed. This generally will be left in auto, and it's going to pull from the best, most reliable source that it has for speed information. When it is in manual, we'll actually see the whole list that it has. The different icons here, this icon, again, is the radar icon. This next one is going to be our wheel speed or GPS speed, and the last one is a manual speed. If we wanted to put in a manual value, or if for some reason all the satellites fell out of the sky, we would have the option to come in here, put in a manual speed, and just go run. Now, we really don't recommend that. as whatever your target rate is going to be, it's going to achieve that at 5 mile an hour, whether you're driving 5 mile an hour or not. So you would possibly be over or under applying.
So that's where you change it if you want it radar.
Yep, radar manual. And then also, depending on how, which series of tractor and how it's wired, will also determine which source it comes from. A lot of the tractors, we have the option to change, they're pre-wired, but we can change a plug to pick from radar or GPS on which source. So that would just, it'd be determined on what model tractor and year that is. Most of the time, we're just going to leave that in auto, and it's going to pick the best, most reliable source for us.
Oh, yeah, auto and pick the
Yeah.
Yep. Down here in the bottom, if you did feel like you were having an issue, we can use this as a diagnostic tool to see the difference between the two. So if we are indeed using a wheel speed source in comparison to radar, we could see what that difference is. So we might have slip on the tractor, but we're not calculating that with radar speed. Radar is whatever we're traveling at. Okay, so our next section, that was the last one of our sensors. If we jump up to our drives, we've got some drop-down options here. Again, this drive configuration is typically set up the very first time, and we don't commonly change this unless we have a major change on the planner for some reason. If we do that, these options that are up there are kind of what you're changing. We would change those through the setup, and then we could go and change those types in there. So if you didn't have quick start on, so if we took off in those scenarios and we were constantly having gaps in the field, we might want to come in here and make sure that quick start option is checked and enabled for us. Other than that, we're typically not making really any changes in here unless we're modifying the planner in some way. Next box down. Our drive sections, again, this is based on how the planner is built, so we have to tell it how many drives we have on it and which drives are controlling a particular row unit. So this is where it'll tell it, drive motor 1 is going to go row 1 through 8, and then we have to tell it our gear ratio, which is drive over driven, to calculate out those ratios. Next one down. Row sections. Some people might change depending on what their needs are. A lot of growers will prefer to have their two outside rows tied together for a section. So in here, when we do this setup, it will essentially ask us how many rows we have. This one, it looks like it's a 24 row. And then it'll ask us for each section how many rows you want to be in there. So it'll ask you for a start and an end to each section. More importantly, because this can get a little bit confusing when you go through it the first time, when you're done, this image here will change. And so if you notice that these block spacings are all off and even, and yeah, this side looks right, but this side does not, you just need to go back through and make some adjustments in there until you get the total number of sections that you expect to see in the plan. That's our last one. Okay. So we'll jump over to seed setup here. Our next box down. So if we're really starting at that main run screen, and typically this scenario would be is we're coming and we're getting ready to do a crop changeover. So we're going to tell it that we're no longer planting corn in this scenario. We're going to change over to soybeans. When we pick that, you'll notice that a couple things changed. It already changed my disc type for me, and then it picked the last plate that I had in there. Now you have an option to build a couple different profiles that are set up for different crop types, to have them saved from season to season or as you plant throughout that growing season. But once we pick one, we'll have that in there. More importantly, I like to point out here, especially on corn, we do have the standard plate, or if we scroll all the way to the bottom, we'll see our Pro Max 40 plate in there. So if we've got Pro Max 40s in there, we have a different number of holes in that plate, so we want to make sure we have the right ones selected so we're getting the population that we expect. Up here at the top, we have use one rate for all motors. This will be relevant if you want to separate. So if we said we had 3 drive motors on this planner, we could run different rates on all 3 of those drive motors. So maybe in seed corn, something like that. If we have different rates, we could split them up that way. Most of the time, we're going to leave that checked and they're all going to be the same. Now, if we go into show rates, so this is what we were talking about earlier, where we could click that box and it would change from rate 1 to rate 2. Now, if we have more than 2 rates in, so if we go in to change rates to turn on, let's say 3 or one of the other ones, we'll turn it on. We'll give it a population target, 22,000. It's going to auto-populate our high and low, and then in real life, down in the simulator, it'll give us our expected spacing. We hit enter, and then we go back to our main run page, and now we cycle through. Now we get a new screen, and we've got to pick that from the list. So it's not quite as fast. If you're looking to make a quick change just by tapping the screen, 2 is what you're going to want to have in there. If you want more available, just know that you're going to have to jump to that screen and select it, and then go back. Okay, so back into show rates. Now, also playing out in here, once we hit change rates, and we go to rate number 6, rate number 6 is always where our prescriptions will lie. So if we have the prescription loaded, you notice this is just a little bit different than our other screens. Since we don't know the actual target rate, and that will change based on what prescription we have loaded, and here we're just going to give it a percentage that'll be high or low of that rate. So anytime we fall outside of that target rate, we're going to get an alarm to tell us that we're out of rate. Check that. And now we see that RX icon down there. So if we went all the way back to our planner page, we went up to our target rates, now we would have that option down here. If we had a prescription loaded, that script would be running. Okay, one last thing in there. Down here in the bottom, so we talk about soybeans. So there are times that soybeans will be planting a high enough population that the seed tube is not capable of reading that many seeds, and some other crop types, not just soybeans. So in those scenarios, instead of having that bar graph look incorrect and be off, we can bring that graph up. Now we're not changing any rates. All we're doing is moving that graph up so it looks correct and normalized as we run through the field. We accomplish that by using this population adjust. So it's going to bring that graph, the center of that scale, up, so that way things look normal, and in the middle as we're running through the field. Your last thing in there. Okay, our next box now are our totals. So earlier we talked about a couple of the total drop downs that we had, so monitor. We could come in here and zero out those totals if we wanted to. We might run, the number 1 counter as our infield, number 2 as a season, and this would be where we entered in those acres if we're counting back to 0. So if we've got 120 acres, whatever that number might be, 150, now we can come in, change that box, and that will count us down from 150. Over here on the right hand side, we'll have the total hours and acres on planner. This will be lifetime of the planner unless the controller was ever replaced or changed. Just like the odometer in a car, that number is set. We do not have the ability, even at the dealership, to change that number for good reason. So whatever is in there is just the lifetime on that controller with that planner. Now let's jump into diagnostics here. Okay, so we get a number of things that are the diagnostics. This is a little bit actually of an older version. It's worth noting of SeedStar. We do see that number information in here now. So if you're ever curious of what version you need to be on, you can look that up and talk to one of us at the dealership, and we can confirm that you're on the latest and greatest. In our drop downs here, we get a few different options. This would be if you're trying to do some troubleshooting or trying to dive in a little bit deeper to things that just aren't looking right, we can do that here. If we hit this first drop down, we'll jump into this sensor status. So anything that's sending voltage to it, we're going to see a reading back in return. So other than just looking at a number like we talked about earlier, we know if we're at least outputting the correct voltage to that sensor. So if something is off there, maybe we need to dive into a wiring issue or troubleshooting some wiring instead of replacing the sensor. Voltages, this just tells if we have good voltage going to the controllers and some of the sensors. Variable rate drives. So this is a good indication if we have good information coming in. And then down here on the bottom, we see the actual RPM that should be commanding that drive to, and then also what percentage you're driving that motor to. So if I have a drive section that was hanging down on me and I seen it from that main run screen, I seen one was dragging down, I could come in here and diagnose a little bit further. And I could say, okay, if it was dragging down and I see it in here, yep, I'm turning less RPM, so that makes sense that my population is less. Now I come over here to look at my valve percentage, and maybe I'm pushing harder on that valve. So if I'm pushing harder on that motor to spin faster, and I'm not accomplishing that, I've got a problem. So either I have a mechanical problem, bearing or something hanging, something in the meter that's hanging up on me, or I've got an issue with that motor or the valve. From here, this will lead into a test that we can do to try to clean that up. We can try to flush that valve. Drop downs. Yeah, let's just jump over to test, and we'll just talk about that one under the test right away. This VRD motor valve flush. So in here we can turn this flush up to 3 seconds, and then we need to have the tractor running at least a couple mile an hour. Generally we turn the vacuum off unless you want to dump a bunch of seed on the ground. And it's going to run those motors, you'll see it down here, up and down, to run outside of the normal range those motors run in. So it's going to kind of clean the dust out of it, cycle those valves to hopefully eliminate anything there on that side if it was the motor that was dragging that section down. If you've got something mechanical, then maybe we just need to go back there and take a peek at what's going on. Let's go back to our drop down. We can look at some seeding information in here if we believe that we have a seed tube that's causing us some grief. You can drop some seeds through there and see if you're getting what you actually drop down through it. Or you can, move a tube from row to row, come back here and see if you're seeing the same thing to see if you have a sensor issue or a wiring issue. We could do rotate motors, and row clutches we'll do next. So rotate motors, kind of the same deal. You can take a drive section and run all of them, or in just one section if we know that's the one that's causing us grief. We can come in here and command that section to run. So we're going to go out and see if we can further diagnose an issue. This is a great tool to initiate that. The other thing we can do is put in a manual speed, trip the height switch, or put something on that to make it go in the opposite position. That would run all the drive stationary too. Back to test, we'll do the last one in here. Row clutches. So this gives you the ability to go through and test all your clutches to make sure that everything is fine and they're actually being commanded when you run them here. So when we do that and hit those circling arrows, it's going to tell us if that clutch passes. We can cycle on to the next one or particular row, run the same test again, and make sure everything is good. This is a good idea to run through this, kind of like your vacuum sensors at the beginning of the season, to make sure everything is good and ready to go before we ever get out to the field. And it just runs through your clutches in the same way. And it says we're all operational.
This one?
So we started off, worked from the beginning, came to our book with our wrench, test, then we have a drop down. We go and pick one of those from that list. Same thing, if you have somebody else out there with you, you should be able to hear those clutches click as they kind of go down the line. Any other questions? Since we have a little bit of time here, we'll jump into a couple other things diagnostic-wise that I like to use. Let's hit our menu icon down here, and we'll see if the simulator will let me do it. GS2. And then diagnostics here. So under your GS2 or GS3, you'll have the same diagnostic tab. And this is probably one of the best, most underutilized things I think Deere has out there. This gives you a really quick overview of diagnostics of what's happening. So typically the scenario would play out is I'll get a phone call and it'll be, this thing doesn't work, or something is not right, or it won't paint for me. In this drop down, we get a whole other list of things like that. So let's pick the first one. We talked about recording. Nate, it's not painting, what do I do? So I can walk you through G, H, and I like I typically do, or I can come here, and this is going to give you a bunch of yes and no answers on what's there. So if we have no in an area, that tells me we're not moving. Now typically it's something like we don't have a field selected or a task defined, and that's one of the first things. So if I can walk somebody here that says, okay, well, I need to start back here, and maybe I need to go to my documentation tab and make sure I've got a planning task loaded. The other thing from the drop down, we'll show you in here. Drop down. If we go into swath control, so this gives you an information on if that section is being commanded. So sometimes we'll get a call that, hey, I think it's turning off too early or too late, or I think I've got a section that's acting up on me. This is going to tell you if the display is commanding it for that exact area. So it's a really good tool to diagnose swath control issues if you're having something like that. Since we're in here, there are no other ones I'll just point out. We click that swath control. You do have a lot of your auto track function in here. So if you're unable to get all pieces of your pie, just another example, this kind of dives in and lists everything out for you so you're not stuck just trying to guess of which one's holding me up. Jump back to SeedStar. Okay, any other questions? Good to go, ready to go plant. Thanks for coming, guys.